Hi, Bhargav, Chudi, Sitati, Bassel. Thanks for getting together, guys, all day. Bassel, let's roll off. I want to just cover off on the main issue in each particular sub-region. That's going to take a while, of course. I'd like you to start. Obviously, a lot of clients and our network are chatting to me saying, when's the invasion going to commence by Russia into the Ukraine? And I'm stating, whilst there's a whole heap of posturing, that's not how I see it'll unfold. You might like to just, whether you agree or disagree with me, give some of your rationale behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I actually agree with you about the non-Russian invasion into Ukraine. Also, tensions are rising up, especially with the recent withdrawal of US diplomats from Ukraine, and also with the recent withdrawal of UK diplomats from Ukraine. The tensions are rising between the NATO alliance and Russia's military operations across the eastern Ukrainian border. But I think the current talks will give Russia what it wants and probably stop an invasion into Ukraine.
And Bhargav?
I must agree, Paul, especially given the Russia's playbook and the kind of buildup which has happened. It looks like a lot of saber rattling and grandstanding on both sides, especially Ukraine and Russia, and NATO have joined in that greater scheme. And tomorrow they are meeting in Paris. Hopefully there will be a major de-escalation in the scenario with France and Germany. Working to de-escalate the scenario as a whole.
And of course, you've got Canadian troops on the ground. Putin is going to clearly understand that if he was to invade, NATO has no option but to respond, and they can't afford to be getting into a protracted ground war. So it's not going to be good for the Russian economy, the way that they're going to probably interdict, not directly just at the battle sites, but way back where Russia isn't expecting it. So it's a no-win scenario for Putin from an economic perspective that would lead to the breakdown of his economy when he's trying to rebuild the Soviet states, and going bankrupt isn't the option. So I see this as you said, saber rattling, but a lot of doomsayers, a lot of media pump without much analysis going on. Anything else to add to that, Bhargav, or anyone?
So, Paul, I would go one step further and say for Russia, it is very important that Eastern Europe is stable. Without that stability, their pipelines, gas pipelines going through to Europe, the lucrative European market will be a big challenge to operate. So I guess that's where the big question is. If they do not de-escalate, the energy crisis is going to worsen, and any further sanctions on Russia, it's going to make things worse on both ends. So hopefully there will be a de-escalation and there'll be a minimal impact on our businesses as well.
Yes, and I think the sanctions are a critical factor, but perhaps not as powerful as Europe and the States think. And we might cover off on that tomorrow. Uday, in your region, what's a major issue you'd like to discuss today?
Thanks, Paul. So I'd like to talk about left-wing extremism in South Asia. Firstly, today we assessed one major development and covered 10 other events. So regarding left-wing extremism in India, authorities in West Bengal issued an alert for a possible Maoist attack across all districts. And there was a clash between Maoists and security forces in Chhattisgarh yesterday also. Now, if we move over to Jharkhand, suspected Maoists blew up a bridge in a district 2 days ago. So just to give a bit of a background, Paul, India has dealt with the threat of left-wing extremism for decades. In fact, there's an area known as the Red Belt, which at one point spanned from the eastern to western coast of India. Now, in the late 2000s and early 2010s, Indian forces launched a massive anti-insurgency operations. Bhargav, what sectors do you see as the most vulnerable to left-wing extremism, specifically the Maoists?
I would highlight two specific sectors, that is mining as well as manufacturing. Some of the states in the central belt or the red belt, they are very rich in their mineral resources, And the same goes to eastern states such as West Bengal, wherein manufacturing has taken a while to pick up, and they are able to take some positive steps. I guess these two sectors need to focus on an upswing in left-wing violence as a whole.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I guess my point is that despite the threat of the Maoist threat having diminished over the years, it still is prevalent, and businesses and travelers operating in these areas need to be aware of these developments. For example, last year, Maoists conducted an ambush on security forces in Chhattisgarh, and they killed 22 security forces. This was a very sophisticated attack. So the threat is still there, and Paul, I think everyone operating in these areas should know about it. But that's
Yes,
all
and
from South Asia. Sorry.
thanks a lot, Uday. And look, I guess it's a timely reminder too that various skirmishes that businesses don't know about, and as you mentioned, manufacturing, and also just the supply chain in general are affected by. I guess there's many other in India besides the Maoist belt. There's and in Southeast Asia, today we've covered 38 odd incidents in East Asia Pacific, and southern Thailand's continuing to build along. Southern Philippines is continuing to build along. The border issues on the Thai side, of course, affect the supply lines right along the Malay Peninsula between Singapore all the way to China and beyond. So it's very prudent of the points that you've raised. Bassel, which region are you covering today?
So, Paul, I'm covering off the Middle East. We had around 10 developments from the Middle East today. We issued also an alert on the United Arab Emirates, especially the latest threat by the Houthi rebels. So
Yes.
The latest threat comes after the Houthi rebels fired a ballistic missile that killed 3 people near the Abu Dhabi International Airport.
Yes.
So apparently the Houthi commander, Yahya al-Sari, yesterday issued a warning to foreign companies and investors, labeling the country as not a safe country for foreign investments. So at the time of that announcement, actually, the Houthi rebels fired a series of ballistic missiles on Saudi Arabia and on Abu Dhabi and Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. So actually, the Houthi rebels have elevated their military operations in Yemen and in Saudi Arabia on foreign companies and investors, and especially in the UAE. At the same time, the warning issued by the Houthi rebel commander indicates their intent to intensify their aerial offensive on the UAE. A question would be here, do you think the Houthi rebels have the capability to shut down operations for foreign companies in the UAE with their threats?
Look, yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, in the UAE, they were all intercepted and destroyed. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I perhaps would feel that the Houthi rebels are elevating their capability in the UAE. Elsewhere, Bhargav, over to you.
Yes, I would say they have the capability to disrupt operations in some of the prosperous countries in the Gulf region, primarily because of 2 primary aspects. First being the Russian backing and Russian indirect backing through Iran, because they're using Russian-made missiles and Russian-made drones supplied by Iranian regime. The second being their dexterity, which they have achieved through the war in Yemen. And that's why countries like UAE have to step up their countermeasures and defense mechanisms. So there is no doubt in my mind that UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, all of them have the capability to counter the threats, but the threat is quite real.
Yes, I think we don't want to overrate the technical capacity, though, of Russian surface-to-surface type missiles, and also overrate the drone capability, underrate the drone capability, which may be a less predictable flight path, therefore harder to detect by the radars inbuilt with the protection of the defence system. So I think we need to monitor this closely. I think right now companies in the major cities in the UAE shouldn't be worrying, but perhaps further afield where the investments in those defensive systems aren't as advanced, they really need to be thinking seriously about their footprint, what they're co-located with, and perhaps doing updated risk assessments, because certainly the risk paradigm has elevated. Anything else on that one?
Just to add to the defense capabilities, we need to note that over the last 2 or 3 years, the Gulf states have a very big, they have spent a lot on defense capabilities, specifically on American weapons, and Saudi Arabia happens to be the largest importer of defense systems. And they did have some issues there because Saudi Arabia tried to acquire S-400 defense system from Russia while actually acquiring majority of the weapon systems from the West. So that's something interesting and to look forward to, especially Saudi, the UAE, and Qatar. All of them are big spenders. Not so much for Oman. Oman is fairly laid back in terms of political as well as defense infrastructure is concerned.
Yes, Bhargav. And also, Qatar and the UAE, and indeed a couple of other states, have pretty much brought in, paid for their own military, so wearing uniforms. They have just gone and procured former Australian artillery armour, infantry, intelligence and special forces, right down to training their own people, but also filling operational roles, which are smart, because to get those skills takes not only a lot of time and money, but it takes a lot of battle hardening, which is tough to do for some cultures, aren't as perhaps rampaging in peacetime as some other cultures. So the capabilities are very high. But let's move on to the next subject for now. Who's next up to bat?
Well, in the case of Africa, we covered 15 developments for the roundup today. And then we also issued an advisory on the military coup in Burkina Faso. So perhaps just a quick through on the military coup in Burkina Faso.
Yes.
A few soldiers led by Lieutenant Colonel Sandaogo Damiba ousted President Roch March Christian Kabore yesterday. And when you look at the patterns that have been developing with the mass protests from June last year through to December, and an attempted coup in January 12th this year, then certainly the military coup was bound to take place. But most importantly, just before you chime in, the coup intensifies the fragile geopolitical and geoeconomic as well as the security situation in the Sahel region.
Okay, very interesting. And do you think they have the capacity to hold on to this, to the land, and run off with coup and pull it off and take it to an election? Or are we going to see immediate and a more aggressive response from some other government force, or is the military very unified on this?
Well, perhaps this takes us back to 2014 when the then President Blaise Compaoré was ousted, and then the military held brief the government for about a year or so before the elections were conducted, which led to the election of the ousted President Christian Kabore. So perhaps learning from that, we could see a situation whereby the military, forms a transitional government, and then later on leads or paves the way to holding elections in the country. And if you follow yesterday's developments, you'd consider, or you learn that the mutinying soldiers announced that the formation of a transitional government specifically will be to lead, or pave the way for the country to have elections. But most interestingly, I think we're also going to look at how this particular development is going to affect the business situation, not just in Mali, but also across the Sahel region as well.
And look, at some point, Sitati, I'd like to drill in on this a little bit more, because normally when there are multiple coups, it is because there is a system of democracy that the borders or the representation isn't fair. So there are parts of society that aren't getting represented appropriately, or there's corruption or other weaknesses of governance that lead to ongoing dissatisfaction. So let's cover off on impacts to business, maybe on the back end of covering off on those issues in a bit more detail in a coming daily audio, okay?
Yeah, I mean, in the case of the effects on the businesses, several airlines have already suspended their flights to and from the capital, Ouagadougou. Some of these flights include Air France, the Turkish Airlines, the Royal Air Maroc of Morocco, and Tunis Air. So in addition to that, we've also had a few embassies, such as the United States Embassy and the French Embassy in Burkina Faso, also issuing advisories to their citizens regarding the unfolding security and political situation or developments in the country as well. And one more thing to note about the unfolding situation is that we are likely to witness protests pitting the military supporters and the supporters of the ousted president, Christian Kabore. And this is likely to lead, to violent clashes, which could as well further disrupt business activities, transportation, and supply chains as well.
Okay, excellent. Appreciate that, Sitati. Any questions? If not, I'll give it a few seconds and we'll move on. Chudi?
Thank you, Paul. In Europe, we covered 11 developments, the main issue being an American-style campus gun shooting in a German university, a non-high-field campus in Heidelberg University.
Yes.
A lone gunman killed one person and injured 3 people at a lecture room, as I mentioned, in Heidelberg University, which is the southwest of Germany. The gunman was a biology student at the university. Mannheim police have released a statement stating that the lone gunman was effectively attributing the killing to a psychological impairment. There is no indication that this is terror-related, as some reports are speculating right now.
Yes.
The main sort of the gravamen of this story is campus shootings of the American iteration are extremely rare in Germany and Western Europe. This is mostly because gun control laws in Western Europe at any rate, extremely strict. So this is a highly, what you might call an outlier incident. And it'll be interesting to see as the details pour out from the ongoing investigation, how German authorities react to this, whether there might be cause to review the gun control laws, even though reports are suggesting that the gun was actually purchased from abroad. So it would be interesting to see what the fallout would be in Germany amid obviously the COVID restrictions that have been taking place in the country.
Yes, and also it's a very low fatality rate and injury rate. I'm guessing that perhaps he was so deranged that he didn't have enough ammunition, or was he overpowered? Has any of that detail come out yet?
Yeah, well, one interesting detail that he actually had 100 bullets were found in a gunman's backpack, but he decided to stop shooting. Only a couple of rounds were actually shot, and he opened fire to 4 people. The police are maybe speculating that he may have been perhaps overwrought by the moment, and unfortunately that would have happened. But yes, it was a fairly low, death toll. So yes, unfortunately.
Okay, wonderful. Anything else, Bhargav, from your end, or should we tidy it off?
Yes, Paul, I would like to just glean in about these aspects of gun control and how it may affect businesses. One case in point being, it's a never-ending story and a never-ending debate of chicken and egg, wherein is it safer to have stricter gun control and that would increase fatalities by accidental gunfire, or is it better to look more closely to the grassroots issues which can actually make things better rather than gun control. On which side do you stand? Because I do know you come from Australia, which has some of the strictest gun control laws, and we have seen in UK and Canada as well, the stricter gun control laws have actually resulted in lower deaths in accidental fires or mental health issues. Where would you stand, Paul?
Oh, look, there's no doubt after a massive massacre in Tasmania and Australia went about giving amnesties, handed in guns. We've only, the statistics are clear and prove that it's a lot safer not to have the guns. And in fact, I'd encourage all of us and all of our readers and clients to get on and watch the comedian Jim Jeffries on gun laws in Australia, because he highlights all of the folly that is reasons that people give for gun laws, and he does it in a brilliant, humorous way. Well, at least humorous for Australians, but it's not language that can be repeated here. But Jim Jeffries, as well as being a comedian, is an incredibly intelligent man, and he articulates the folly that people want to believe and the fact that various political lobbies will enable death rather than common sense. And unfortunately, common sense isn't. It should have perhaps had the name rare sense, but it's a no-brainer, and it's only mutants that argue mute points, because there is no rationale for assault rifles in modern societies, and you can amend amendments. Okay, let's round it up, chaps. Thank you very much. Cheerio.